Hello, Culture Matters podcast. Boy, am I excited about our episode today. Before I introduce you to our guest, here is a quote just for this episode. It is funny. I don't feel old enough to give advice, but with the advisors you trust, you better listen to them. It may be bad news, but that's the only way you're going to improve. Ben Hepner, our guest today. One of my advisors, someone I hold in a high regard. They're not only deeply knowledgeable at their craft, but someone that tells the truth, shares it like it is. I'm very proud to have them on the show. They have a background not only in corporate law, a bit of economics, political science. I always get along with people like that for some reason. We can explore that maybe today, but also deeply versed in the idea of law and tax or taxation. And I challenge all of you listening to this, listen closely because if you're an entrepreneur and you haven't explored these concepts, it may be the time to do it today. So, the one and only associate at Lex Nova, we love deeply corporate law and taxation. Yuri Mitchell is here. And I should say, if you're listening to this podcast after this episode, go check out episode 645 with our friend Peter Spergel and episode 661 with Chumanya Osoha, who are great colleagues of Yuri Mitchell here and great friends of the Culture Matters podcast. So thanks for coming on the show. Yuri, I'm glad I could finally track you down.
Yeah, hey, happy to be here. Thanks a lot, Jay. And actually, that is a very apt quote because I don't feel like I'm old enough to give advice, you know?
Yeah, like so when it comes to giving advice to people that are entrepreneurs,
Hmm.
I want to start with like the value of corporate law to entrepreneurs because a lot of our listeners are founders of, small businesses that may not even have an attorney in their when they immediately think of attorney, they think of lawsuit or
Right,
something along those lines. So, first question is, what is the value of of a lawyer outside of it, the advisor outside of, oh, I'm getting sued, in your view?
right. Well, it's funny that you say that. I was actually I started back in 2013 as a litigator. So in terms of actually lawsuits, I'm very familiar with those as well. I came over to the transactional side after I got my master's in tax from NYU in 2018. So I've only been doing this for about 6 years, just on the tax and corporate side.
Wow.
But yeah, it's the corporate side I'd say is almost more important for up and coming entrepreneurs to get in and understand what we have to offer. Um, because documentation, as much as people hate documenting and making sure that all your legal documents are up and up and in great shape, that's probably the single most important thing you can do outside of running your business day to day. If so many people get started and they have a great idea, they're go-getters, and they just kind of hit the ground running, and before you know it, they're running into issues that we could have solved earlier on.
Hmm.
So, coming from a litigation background, again, I can see how some of these things go wrong. Understanding what documentation can do for you and really getting in on the ground floor and building that up versus then trying to play catch up once things
Hmm.
do go wrong is critical to any business. Certainly any business that's going to survive more than a couple of years.
Um, when it comes to documentation, I just want to be clear. I'm a listener. I started my business 4 years ago, and my first partner was LegalZoom.com.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, listen, I'm not going to lie. That's a solid. I would recommend most people that start off right off the bat. I mean, you don't go and get a high paying attorney, like a high priced attorney. Why, right? LegalZoom, it's all right. It'll probably get you started. It'll probably get you the origination documents to get your business started. But as soon as you feel that you have a little bit of cash coming in, I think you should get an advisor that you can actually ask questions of. Outside of AI, outside of Chat GPT, and outside of LegalZoom.
What's
Um,
the, yeah, what are the some of the nuances that a human being like yourself that's invested, the who knows how many, I mean, you could tell me
yeah,
hours in understanding the not just law, but the disciplines around it, right? Political science, economics, going deep into taxation. What are the nuances that that do reflect value in your estimation versus that chat GPT conversation that a lot of the entrepreneurs that are listening, that's the route they're going. They don't know what they don't know. They don't have a relationship
right.
with you. What would be what's the value, the nuances?
Well, every business is different, right? So something like a Chat GPT and certainly LegalZoom, Chat GPT is a little bit better because it tries to take an aggregator, but there's a lot of issues with Chat GPT when it just will tell you the wrong thing, right? So I wouldn't listen to that at all outside of maybe getting like a little bit of a baseline knowledge, but certainly don't rely on that. But LegalZoom is going to be a copy and paste approach, right? You might answer a couple questions that that form has, and maybe it'll craft some sort of document that's specific to a certain state, but it won't give you what you need to grow your business. For
Mm.
example, I don't think most people know this, but if you're operating in one state, that's great, right? You make the organizational documents in that one state, but as soon as you go to any other state, and that could be as simple as basically having a website up sometimes. If you have like a buy button on a website, you're engaged in all 50 states.
Mm.
Typically, if your business is large enough in a given state, you have to register as a foreign business in that state because the state needs to know about that. And what the state can do then, if you're not doing that, they find out about that, you get sued by the state, you get levied a bunch of taxes if there's income or franchise taxes. Um, there's a bunch of issues with that. There's sales tax issues, implications. Recently, I don't know if you've heard about this, but before it used to be where if you operate in one state, and so long as you don't directly sell to another state, you can more or less say, okay, I operate only in this state. Like I don't need to worry about like sales taxes, right?
Mm.
But there was a huge court case in 2018, Supreme Court case that basically turned that all on its head, and now like without getting into the depths and details of it, basically any business that sells is likely having tax issues in all 50 states if there's
Oh,
sales or franchise taxes.
another reason to be proactive then.
Oh, for sure. Again, if you're running a small operation where you're barely making ends meet and you don't have a large footprint, legal advice is I'd say it's always necessary, but there are some things you can maybe, you know, I wouldn't say get away with doing, but at least when you're under certain thresholds, it's not as important. But once you start growing, all that documentation is extremely important, and it's gets even more important the more people you engage with.
What do you
For
mean?
example, well, without getting into the details of what we're doing for you, right? If you're looking at it, you might be going into a business and you might involve a friend, right? And you might have the best friend in the world. He's been your buddy since high school or whatever, and you put him in the business and you guys are all aligned on everything. And then just like a married couple, there'll be a misunderstanding and expectations. And that's what
Mm.
drives so many lawsuits, especially when a business is successful. You
Well,
can see
why
that.
successful versus unsuccessful?
Well, if there's more of a pie to get upset over, then typically, you'll get more upset over it. It can be at any level, but really, once you start getting more and more successful, if you assume that, hey, I'm putting in 60%, so I should be getting 60% of the revenue or something like that, and your best buddy's saying, well, no, we went in 50-50, and then all of a sudden, okay, well, what's governing that? Where do you go to decide that dispute?
I want to see if this analogy makes sense. Is it akin to the value in theory of like a prenup, except the only difference is it's not till death do us part with a business partnership, like necessary, right? We're going to a business partnership. It's not like a marriage where it's in theory
Right.
till death do us part. A business partnership, I think yeah, eventually is going to end. Like Charlie Munger just passed away, 99 years and 11
Sure.
months.
Sure.
So I'm
Succession
curious
planning
if
is
that
part of it.
analogy is
No,
helpful or
that's a great analogy. I mean, with a marriage, you bring in all your assets versus a business, you just bring in the assets that you bring into the business, right? So that'd be the only difference. But in terms of getting the understandings out of the way and making sure that you have something to rely on when you do have those misunderstandings, yeah, that's very similar. That's a great analogy.
for those that don't have not experienced on the litigation side of
Yeah.
law, uh, why does that exist? What is its purpose? How does that yeah, what does it solve?
What do you mean on the litigation side of the law? What would,
Like
yeah.
litigate, what is litigation? Why does it exist? If on a very basic level,
Oh
like
yeah, yeah,
is
sure. So I
that
mean, on the very basic level, litigation is just the area of the law is like what you were saying earlier. What most people think of lawyers are is when you go out and sue somebody. That's all that litigation is just a lawsuit litigate. Versus the transactional side, which is usually what I'm involved in, where you transact business, buy, sell companies, help people with their organizational documents, et cetera, et cetera.
buy,
So
sell, transact,
yeah,
documents? That seems
those
like
are
proactive.
yeah,
This
those are
one's
kind of
reactive.
yeah, that's a good way of putting it. But those are the two kind of main areas of law as we know it in the United States. The laws outside of criminal and all that stuff. But in terms of business law, there's the lawsuit side, the litigation side, and then the transactional side, right? And those are
Hmm.
the idea behind transactional law is to avoid the litigation side as much as possible.
Why? Why?
Well, you don't want to be involved in a lawsuit. It's very expensive. It creates a lot of bad feelings. It creates, I mean, it once you have a dispute that goes between, that goes outside of you and your partner or whoever else you're disputing with into a broader sphere, like the courtroom, there's so much that's involved. It's a slow time. It's a big time commitment. It's a big expense commitment, and it usually results in everybody walking away unhappy. As a matter of fact, one of my mentors when I was doing litigating, and that's a very common refrain you'll hear in law school is when you're doing mediation, it's a good mediation. And mediation's a way to avoid a final trial on a given subject, right? So when you're thinking, okay, I have a pretty good thing with my lawsuit, but I'm not sure how it's going to turn out. Let's go and mediate. And how a result of a good mediation is when everybody walks away a little bit unhappy.
Why? Why?
Well, I mean, listen, if everybody typically, you mediate, you have your staked out position, right? Yeah, you owe me $100,000 or whatever, and the guy's like, no, I don't owe you anything, and then you end up at 50. Usually, you come to the middle, right? So the idea is that one guy didn't want to pay you anything, but you wanted 100, so you're at 50, so you're a little bit unhappy. The other
Mm.
guy's a little bit unhappy, but you're not. Then you don't go to trial and figure out who's right and who's wrong.
What's some advice you give someone that coincidentally is in the midst of something that like that right now and how to show up and make the least fool of themselves?
In what context?
Let's say like make the least fool of themselves as in to get the best result from a yeah, they're in a legal dispute. Are there things like through your experience that you've recognized there's certain clients that do the best
Yeah,
in how they approach it or anything like of that nature, from your experience or ways not to approach a situation like that that could be practically
right.
useful for any of the listeners. They could be in the midst of these things right now for all we know.
Yeah. As much as possible, and it's impossible completely to do this because we're human beings, but as much as possible, take emotion out of it. Emotion ruins not only good deals, but it ruins what could potentially be a solvable issue into something that, will spin out of everybody's control. A lot of times, what people don't necessarily want they don't necessarily want, like a peaceful resolution. They want like justice. Like I've been wronged, right?
Mm.
My business partner stole from me, so I want him punished, right? You got to take that out, and you got to let the attorneys, so long as you get a good one, like the litigators in our office, for example, to to do their job. I've seen this so often, even on the litigation side, and even more so now when I interact with litigators in our office, is that clients get in the way of a good deal, whether it's on our side when we're representing the client or somebody else, where their attorneys are getting tired of them, or to where they're just impractical. And that's because they have so much emotion. And in business, you don't think about it really, but business is just as emotional as anything else. It's as emotional as a marriage and a divorce. It's just as emotional as, child issues. It's just as emotional as estate issues, when your grandpa died and he didn't leave you enough or something like that, right? It's while it's more transactional than that, for most people, it's their life's work, it's their life's blood, right? So when things go wrong, logic rarely prevails. So
Good quote.
huh?
That's a good quote.
So I would stress to everyone as much as possible to, take emotion out of it, step back, and let your attorneys that you hire do the work.
You mentioned or alluded to, good or bad attorneys. Some questions or ways to look at for audience when hiring those advisors for those scenarios. Are there certain things that they could be looking for that would be helpful to them, or certain red flags to be in your view to take notice of?
Well, it's hard for me to tell, right? Because Lex Nova is full of great attorneys, so we don't have any bad ones. Um, but really, hmm, I guess a lot of it's probably word of mouth, right? That's where our business kind of um, grows and then dies. So I'd say get recommendations from people that you trust. I would not listen to billboards. I would not listen to commercials. I wouldn't necessarily even go for the large law firms all the time. The thing with large law firms is, especially if your case is under some monetary threshold that's arbitrary for every law firm,
Mm.
but if there it's considered small to you, it might be the largest thing in the world, right? It's a big deal. Again, it's your life's work, your or it's your custody battle or whatever. But if you go to a major nationally recognized law firm that's the largest in the tri-state area or whatever, they're gonna either assign it to an associate who's brand new and maybe doesn't care as much, or they'll just, put it on the back burner. No, not always, not always. And I mean, the idea is for everybody to represent their clients as to the best of their ability. But again, it's human nature. If you're a large law firm and you have, a client that you're billing out and he's paying you, 100 to $200,000 a year for a $10 million matter versus somebody that's, just a startup or something that has $1 million business at issue and they're paying you 10% of that. Well, who are you going to listen to? Whose phone are you going to pick up every day, right?
Great
I guess
point.
that. But it all depends. There's some fantastic attorneys and some large law firms, of course. I mean, that's why they're so successful. But I'd say, get a consultation with whoever you feel is practical and kind of go from there. It's a relationship exercise, just like anything else. So see who you mesh with, and yeah.
From all the entrepreneurs that you've come across in your tenure and even your mentors that you've learned from them, um, what's the relationship of the attorney to the to the client? Like, where does that fall in the stack of advisors for entrepreneurs? Um, bottom, middle range, up there, because you have CPA, everyone has different advisors or like has
Right.
different views of the value of advisors. But what would you say that relationship really means to an entrepreneur?
It kind of depends on where you are in your business. If it's, if you have an attorney team and you're a huge business, it's probably less so than somebody that's just starting out. But yeah, I'd rank. a attorney-client relationship pretty high on that spectrum of importance, right? You need somebody that you can trust. At the same time, an attorney can't answer everything for you, right? That's like if all of a sudden your attorney starts kind of running your business plan for you, that's a little strange. That'd probably be a red flag, honestly. But yeah, that's it's relatively high. It should be somebody that you can trust. It's somebody that you work with, and it's somebody that can, help you take the next step of your business with you in the driver's seat.
Mm. Like, are attorneys go at people's weddings?
Oh, of course. I mean, eventually, I wouldn't go to a person's weddings for when you're in the middle of a dispute or something, right? Or in the middle of a big issue. But yeah, I mean, friendships are made absolutely all the time.
How helpful has studying the litigation side as it relates to this now corporate law strategy and right focusing it in tax? You think there, yeah, how important, if at all, has it been, or how valuable, if at all, in your experience, has it been to go from the litigation side? Because if I'm learning from this conversation, I'm thinking,
Yeah,
yeah, one's reacting to what may or may not have been done from a documentation
right.
side, or yeah, like culture, all that, and the other is the corporate tax. It's this is where we're going. This is what we're up to. This is how we're going to
And
move
and
forward.
done so to avoid some of those things that we've talked about, right? Yeah, no, that so for me it's actually been invaluable. It was great to see when I was first starting out, I'd be like, well, how did this even happen? Like, why is this business lawsuit come to pass? What happened here? Why did this company fail? Why is it being sued out of existence now, or whatever the case, or why are these people in dispute? So I could see why things went wrong, and now bringing it to my practice now, I can see like, all right, well, this is how we mitigate that. This is what I would have done to avoid that
Mm.
lawsuit, right? So that kind of experience has been fantastic. I often think back to some of my cases and things like, all right, I can see why we're doing this right now. Like Peter, great mentor to me, would assign me and say like, hey, look at this, and I think we should do X, Y, Z for this given client, for this given company. And, maybe I'll think about like, okay, why? And then I think about back to some of my cases. I've had this experience before. I thought back to, oh, well, this would have been really helpful back then. If
Wow.
if these partners had thought of this and had documented this and whatever, then they could have avoided the whole, multi six figure legal bill that they eventually had to do.
Oh, that ooh, I'd love to explore that for a second too. Like the value of investing in. So, on a scenario, what I from a consulting standpoint, I've
Yeah.
observed over the years. I think I have it down to this word picture. I want your feedback on. It's better to invest, or sometimes businesses have to invest, and just use an arbitrary number, 1 million the wrong way to learn how to invest 100,000 the right way. Is that connect in your mind at all when it comes to the right legal partnership?
Yeah, investing in, not that you'll see a return from investing into, legal services. That's not what they're there for, right? Legal services are there to make sure that you don't have issues in the future. So it's more like, and then this is kind of tying back to what I said in the beginning. When you're a smaller business, um, whatever issues that you might not have planned for because you don't have a good legal advice, or maybe consulting advice, and maybe that you've seen some of this in your consulting business, maybe there'll be smaller issues, right, on the smaller business. But as soon as that business upscales and grows, like that small issue that might have been, easily solved 6 months, a year or 2 years ago is now huge, and it's almost insurmountable. So it's not so much that you're, investing $100,000 into your legal fees or whatever and expecting 1 million out of it next year.
Yeah.
It's just so that when you do make that next 1 million or 2 million, you're not paying, half of that to settle those issues.
Hmm.
Um,
It
and,
reminds me of I've had numerous people in the insurance world on the show talk about like life insurance being like one of the least sexy things to buy,
Mhm.
or who wants to think about their demise.
Right.
But it's a hedge in a sense against what could
Yep.
happen. Is that an analogy that fits?
Yeah, yeah, I think so. I mean, not only a hedge of what could happen, but also what needs to happen to make your business grow, right? Like we were talking about
Mm.
uh, the different states or something like that, right? You need to know that once you're growing, you need to conform to these regulations. And a lot of people think like, hey, regulations, I'm so tired of it, and why are we doing all this types of stuff? Honestly, they're there to probably protect both the consumer, if you're like a some sort of a sales business, and the business itself, right? That's what helps avoid lawsuits, and you have to conform to those regulations. And part of that is when you have a bigger business, you'll have to do more conformity, but that also protects you.
Or early on, did you aspire to be an attorney? Was that the beginning with the end in mind, or in the legal profession when you were young, or did that come later after studying economics and political science? Those are
Yeah, I mean,
interesting.
certainly as a kid, I think everybody wanted to be something cool, like a fireman or something. I think I wanted to be a pilot. I think I always looked at like Air Force and stuff and
Wow.
things like that. That's back then. So I started in politics and economics in college and started doing pre-law. Just so happened that found myself to be pretty good at those things. Went to law school, got a full scholarship to law school, and I figured, all right, let's do this thing.
Now you came here young, right? Six, seven, eight from Russia.
Yeah, yeah. I was born in St. Petersburg, Russia, and I immigrated with my family when I was yeah 7.
Is St. Peter? I don't know what's the capital. Is that St. Petersburg?
No, Moscow is the capital.
Moscow. See,
Yeah.
I'm glad this is recorded so people could see my geographical
No, no worries.
understanding. Um, are Yeah, what was that like to come to the US? Was that formative to your, to today, do you think at some level?
Oh, for sure.
Like
Yeah.
I'm thinking from like a an awareness perspective, or a seeing the whole chessboard versus just kind of one
Yeah.
dimensionally.
Yeah. For me again, just I actually had the chance to kind of do an internship during my law school years in Russia, and
Oh yeah, the Kraken place.
I'm sorry.
Kraken. Am I saying that wrong? I thought it was like
Oh,
I saw it
the
on your
Kochkin
resume.
and Partners. Did you
Yeah.
see that on my resume?
Hodgkin. There you go. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
Kraken.
yeah, yeah. So that was a law firm in St. Petersburg, and they were great. I mean, they great law firm. But it's pretty crazy some of the stories from there. Uh, it was pretty funny. One of the principals, we were having lunch one time, and they're like, "Yeah, a lot of times everybody goes from private practice into government work." And that's kind of that's interesting because usually, a lot of times in the US, like you go government work and then you do like private practice, right? That's a pretty often
Yeah.
career path. And he's like, yeah, everybody here does the other way, and okay, so why is that? And he's like, well, I got offered a position of, some government official in St. Petersburg, and he was like saying, and the person that was trying to hire him, he's like, well, on paper, you'll make, you know, I'm pulling a number out of my out of the thin air, but it's like what amounts to like $50,000 a year, which is of course a lot less than we was making in private practice. But then he like winks and nods, like, but don't worry, we're all driving Bentleys here anyway.
Wow.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, the level of institutionalized corruption is pretty incredible. So seeing that and seeing how important it is to have like the rule of law in the United States, that's really why, I mean, the United States is probably, the greatest country in the world, one of the greatest countries, one of the greatest places to grow your business because you know that when you start a business here, that's what I'm saying. Like I'm kind of a big institutionalist. You have these protections for your business against, either the government or protections between the business owners and then the people that they're, their clients or their consumers, whatever the case may be, where you can grow stress free, where you don't have to, when you file a form, understand that you also have to file it along with a $2,000 check or more to the local,
Wow.
person that processes these forms. That's such a huge advantage that's not really there in so much of the world. You know, our institutions are some of the greatest things that we have in the United States.
Like invisibly protecting us. We could take it
Yeah.
for granted.
Yeah, I mean, and it's incredible how much of that is taken for granted here, which I mean, I understand. You grow up in it, you never think of like, oh, it's crazy. I for every form that I have to submit, I have to go to a notary public. And a notary public in the United States is, you could be your secretary. You take a class, you fill out a couple of forms, you're a notary public. In Russia, a lot of times it's a specific office where you have to stand in line for hours sometimes
Wow.
to, unless of course you sneak in, a little bit of something underneath the door, and all of a sudden you're next in line. So I mean, you can't grow a good business in that kind of environment, right?
Wow.
It's all about like money exchanging hands and greasing the right palms. While here, for the most part, if you have an idea, if you're a
Wow.
go-getter, if you have the right support and the right drive, you can pretty much do anything.
Yeah, I just took a course on by Michael Mouse, the Soviet Union on like a website. It was like a non-accredited Russian course, basically
Hmm.
about the history. Yeah, it was really powerful course. And so if I understand some of what I recall, you what wasn't the didn't the didn't the USSR end in the late 80s,
Well, that's when the
late
Berlin
90s,
Wall.
91? I thought when I was
Uh,
born it ended, so you would have been there like 3, 4 years old or something.
yeah, yep, yeah. So I was technically born in the
90, I
USSR.
think. Was
I'm
it
sorry.
91?
It was 91. Yeah, exactly. That's
Okay,
the.
I got an A minus, but I
There
don't
you
remember
go.
everything. I mean, so that yeah, you would have been a little kid. Do you remember
Yeah.
anything at all from that time? Because
Yeah. I mean,
culture-wise, right? Like transition, that's
right.
fascinating to me. I'm just
I was
self
3 years
curious.
old when the actual dissolution happened, but I do recall, I think I recall like my grandparents watching um, when the Duma, I think that's like the Congress, tried to kind of take over the presidency and turn it back into like more of a Soviet thing. And that was 91 or I don't quite remember, but I
Yeah,
recall,
and they
I feel
talked
like I
about that.
recall
The
watching
guy
that on TV with like the
Yeltsin
tanks and
came out and with
everything.
the tanks. Yeltsin, right? He
Yeah,
came
yeah, and
out.
Yeltsin got on the tank and like started like yeah.
Wow.
So yeah, so that was pretty crazy. I mean, it was a period of great upheaval. But there was like a bright path ahead that could have been taken, right? Unfortunately, in my opinion, I don't think that path was taken, and now it's back
Wow.
to a dictatorship. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. Actually, my the person that became my dad, um, he was the first exchange student or one of the first exchange students that was like allowed in
Wow.
Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. So he has all sorts of crazy stories about how like, oh, you're American, oh, that's amazing. Everybody was taking pictures with him and everything stuff. Or
Wow.
the crazy stories that he had about driving with his taxi driver and all around. So,
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah, I'm curious what because you've lived in, you're from another culture. I mean, you speak both languages proficiently. Like, what's your views on co company culture, just from working on the litigation side and now on the corporate tax side? Like, curious what because if you're dealing, in the past you were litigating, right? That's dealing one
Yeah.
side of culture. And then on the corporate side, planning and vision strategy, what's your take on culture and where you see it fits in the equation or doesn't?
Oh, it absolutely does. I do like the name of your company. Culture matters for sure, 100%.
Thanks.
And I think an offshoot of that is something I briefly, something that I touched on earlier is, having a good culture, but not being emotional about it. You know, being able to adapt being
Mhm.
able to go with the flow, and at the same time, making sure that you have those advisors that can make sure that, all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted.
Mm.
Um, I can't stress this enough about how much it's incredible how much emotion actually goes into, um, ruining what would otherwise have been great businesses, great opportunities, great meetings, great negotiations. And that is why I think also it helps to have all sorts of, whatever documentation. If you're making an operating agreement with your partner, you have that in black and white. And whenever something happens, we can just go back to it and like, hey, this is what we agreed on, you know, 2 years ago or whenever we made this company. This is what we agreed on. So everything's fair here. Great. Otherwise, you have, I don't know if you've seen The Social Network.
Yeah.
That's
Yep.
like a great example of what happens when like egos and emotions get in the way. I don't know if you remember the Mark Zuckerberg character and then like his friend that got like diluted and there was that big issue with.
Saverin or something like that,
Yep,
or
yep, yep. Now I don't know what their, paper trail was in the very, beginning of the company, but my guess is that if they had everything buttoned up correctly, that wouldn't have happened.
and the idea there is that if it's in black and white, there's less interpretation, less interpersonal conflict based on
Yep.
lack of facts. I want to make sure I understand that clearly, right, for the audience. Lack
Yeah.
of facts would lead to more personal interpretation and then m less clarity,
And there's a
more.
lot less of misunderstanding of expectations. You
Where
know,
does character play into all this, right? As coincidentally, I was like, character matters too. I agree with that deeply. Um, in your estimation, character.
yeah, well, I mean, I think that might be, while related, slightly different because depending on what kind of character you have, you might have less issues, right? With a given person. If you're a very personal person, you meet somebody that's similar to you, then maybe you'll have less issues with that. Maybe you're more of a go to the flow kind of person. Um, what I would stress is that, if you're more a go with the flow type of person that has less issues with everybody else, what we're trying to protect is when, you meet people or you have relationships that are not the same as what you are. Again, it's like this misalignment of expectations,
Mm.
right? So you might be the most affable guy in the world and let things slide off your back and you might be great, but then either somebody decides to take advantage of that or again there's a misunderstanding and somebody's more thinking they're, owed certain things that you didn't think that you were granting, and then that's where issues come up. So, I'm not sure a character is exactly related to what I'm talking about, but that it takes all kinds.
Oh, what about strategy? And, where does that fit into the corporate legal space? Is that a component of it in
Strategy,
your
like a business strategy, having like a layout of like a 5-year plan, is that kind of what you're saying, or?
like how does that match up, align with the documentation piece, or are they just
Mhm.
two separate worlds, or should they be thought of for our listeners that are thinking strategically about the future? Do those two just line up perfectly, or are they different conversations?
I think you should always have that in mind, even if we're going or to strategy. Like, again, I can kind of go back to what I was saying about the different states issue, right? If your strategy is to do consulting in just one state and not ever go and like have clients in other states, okay, well, that takes less documentation as something like, all right, well, our strategy is to grow in 5 years to encompass, North America and Canada, US and Canada or something like that, right? That takes that, then in that case, you would want to have, all your ducks in a row, proper sort of documentation, all your operating agreements. If your strategy is you're investing in a business where the principal is maybe nearing retirement age, Well, in that case, you have to have documentation on succession planning. You know, if they don't have robust succession planning documents, it could be the best business in the world. And they want to attract new investors. But if new investors come in and say, well, okay, well, you're 75 right now, you're 10 years past where you could have retired. What happens tomorrow? What happens in 5 years? If you don't have that succession planning in place, your business is probably dead in the water as soon as you're gone. And investors will recognize that.
What are some of the things that you saw that could be valuable to our listeners or in the M&A world? Because you were in the mergers and acquisitions departments, correct? With some of larger firm at one point, like
Yeah, I work in a big four accounting
PwC.
firm, and I did a tax consulting for their M&A practice. Um,
What did you see made M&A successful? What are some of the things that made it not successful? I think that would be
yeah,
really helpful to
and,
our listeners
and
that
we do
don't know.
some smaller scale M&A at Lex Nova as well, right? Whenever somebody's looking to sell their business, roll ups, um, buy other businesses. The the most successful uh, M&A deals that I've seen done all involve like an overcommitment to documenting everything. I mean, that sounds very broad. That sounds maybe a little too like intimidating, but whenever you're buying or a company, you want to know everything about it. Just if you're looking to start a company and sell it in 5 years, think of the other end of the spectrum. What does a buyer actually want to see? They
Yeah.
don't want to see that, every all that your company is just based off of, your vibes, your feels, like that you think that, oh, hey, I'm projected to do this because it sounds right to me. They want to see the correct documentation, the correct, business growth plan, a make sure all your operating agreements are in alignment, make sure that any tax elections you took are great, and then are still in effect, everything like that. So what slows down deals is when those types of issues come up. So say you're trying to buy a company and maybe their tax elections are deficient and they have all these back taxes that are due that the sellers didn't even know about. Well, you might have had a $10 million deal before. All of a sudden that's going to be $8 million, or some other discount.
Because and the things, the I's and T's weren't crossed, the proactivity wasn't there for the seller. They didn't know what they
Well, it's
didn't
not
know.
only the
They didn't have the
productivity,
right
but it's like,
advisors.
I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead, go ahead.
No, it's not just the productivity. It's maybe
I said proactivity, sorry, proactive.
oh, yeah, like liabilities that they didn't even know they had. Right.
Do you
That's
think there's a
so
connection with that, with who their advisors are?
yeah, who their advisors are, who did their, diligence things on even if they had other purchases. I had this one big litigation client back in Texas. They bought a huge business, huge successful business, in comparison to what I was doing otherwise. And it was like a shoe company that I don't want to get too much into specifics, but basically, when they were doing their due diligence, they did very customary, like small time due diligence, and then sold the business to another company. And what happened from the first sale to the second sale is that they didn't realize in the first sale, a lot of patents were expired, right? So now they sold to the second business for less. They happened to have, losses and whatever, and the business didn't work out. So not only did they sell for less to this secondary company, now they were getting sued because they didn't check the patents from that prior company. Now, granted,
Mm.
everybody was started suing everybody and there was cross suits and everything, but the like our clients like borrowed monies from their family members, right? And now their family members are getting dragged in because they were tangentially related to this deal from the first. It was a mess, right? And that all stemmed from doing poor due diligence, which is just poor documenting, poor checking.
It sounds like like responsibility is a huge component to being successful in
Yeah, of
this.
course, on all fronts, but the responsibility for getting everything squared away correctly. Yeah. I mean, when you're running a small business, you're responsible for everything, right? You don't have like a large team to fall back on, or you're not just the CEO and then you got hired and fired as any other employee, right? Um,
These
your
much
business is
larger
you.
businesses are relying on people that it's not their business,
Right,
and they still have to get it all done.
right. So yeah, I mean, I guess we have one theme in this entire episode is that, meticulous documentation is extremely important to growth.
It's not just a waste of thoughts and time and another thing to be anxious about or avoid to put off later.
Yeah, yeah.
But
And
entrepreneurs do that like naturally. It's almost like that's
what, putting things off?
when it comes to I mean, maybe I'd like your this is my my speculation is that the entrepreneurial, like I'm talking about the startup founder, that's an alien, that's a more alien thing to think about. Because it's like sales, marketing, sales, not
Right,
necessarily like you said, the person that's wearing all the hats or doing all the things, trying to just sell and stay afloat. Are they
hmm
really thinking about this conversation? That's why I wanted to really have you on, really. It's like maybe wake up some of our listeners. But anyway, yeah, my speculation would be psychologically, that might not be something they are thinking as nearly as important as I think you've laid out today.
I hope so. I hope I've laid it out at least convince some people because again, geez, during those 4 years in litigation, it was crazy how much like misunderstandings just got in the way of, I mean, just about everything, right? And really, some people's lives were like just ruined. They went from running a successful business to losing it all.
Yuri Mitchell, thanks for the wake up call. I'm ready to run around the house, do some push ups, and
All right. Well, I
enjoy
hope we're not
Jay and
ending on
company.
too sour of a note.
I just think, well, but insert like, I just, I'm about to make I think a silly Western joke. I admire you greatly, and thank you for your help. And anyone listening to this, Yuri's the real deal. Where can people reach out to you? Most quickly to maybe apply for your counsel or something. What would you say is the best way to contact you?
Yeah, you can email or call our office. If you just Google Lex Nova Law, and then you can look at our list of attorneys, Yuri Mitchell, or just Google me. My personal webpage on our law firm website has all my contact details. I respond best to email. Feel free to give me a call too. My direct dial's on there. And otherwise, we have like a client contact form as well. You can use that.
Thank you very much, my friend. And if you're listening, thank you very much. And please leave us a review on the Culture Matters podcast, and we will see you next time.
Thanks a lot, Jay.